Before we begin, let me paint you the full picture. 10 years, 2 games, 12 expansions, and 15 raids. This is Destiny, the monument to all your sins. It's hard to explain the reaction Destiny first garnered in 2014, just a year or two off of one of the most successful games of the Xbox 360 era, Halo Reach. Being much younger then, I enjoyed what was present, even if it's hard to remember. Cool guns, space magic, RPG elements, and hard co-op boss encounters are all things no one can dispute. And while these things have formed the backbone of Destiny throughout its history, I do not think this alone will be its legacy. But before we delve into specifics, let's examine the difference in the game today from its past, 10 years prior. Firstly, I think boss difficulty has shifted significantly, from large bosses with far too much health and arenas with far too many enemies, to more reasonable health bars with a carefully crafted enemy density and a heavier focus on mechanics. I remember the days of glitching behind a wall just so you wouldn't get wiped instantly by a nightfall. I remember Icebreaker being a requirement. The days of popping a heavy synth, blowing your load, then waiting out the cooldown before repeating. Now it's important to note that I was an average player with most likely a below average progression. That being said, there was an extremely small amount of survivability back then. In fact, there was only invisibility on Blade Dancer, rest in peace, Bubble Titan, and Self-Res Warlock. If I remember correctly, and I may not, Red Death was also in the game, but could only be achieved by getting the exotic bounty to drop whenever a regular bounty was turned in. This chance was extremely low, and the quest line was extremely long as well, but I figured it was worth mentioning. The point I'm trying to make here is that year 1 of Destiny, at least for regular people, was extremely hard, with harder activities running easily 1 to 2 hours, whereas in Destiny today, your harder activities are balanced with more than just damage to the player. Champions are essentially battlefield commanders that have special abilities which require a certain type of weapon or effect type to easily neutralize. On top of that, the burn modifiers are tuned to be effective but fair, unlike the 200% damage scaling they had in D1. Furthermore, the bosses in Destiny today are typically lower in health, but with phases that require you to complete a mini-objective before you can return to damaging the boss. This allows for the difficulty to be the encounter as a whole rather than just getting hit. To summarize, Destiny 1, the first year at least, was balanced like Halo 2. Relatively fair until you attempted harder level content, in which it became near impossible to do in a decent amount of time. Destiny 2, on the other hand, is much more like Halo Reach. Challenging, but easily achievable if you know what you're doing. Next, I'd like to talk about item rarity, or rather the lack of it in current-day Destiny. Now, this is a nuanced subject, and one that cannot be definitively given a mark either way, but I do believe it's worth mentioning all the same. At launch, Destiny had quite a problem with legendary drops and their uncommon appearance in legendary engrams. In short, you would more often than not get a rare item from an engram that should be giving you a legendary item. Now this is both unhealthy for the game and misleading for the player, so this being fixed, albeit slower than it should have been, was a good fix, even if it was never something that should have had to be fixed. The main subject I want to touch on is the frequency in which legendary, and to a greater extent exotic items dropped. It was low, to an amount that would shock anyone playing Destiny in its current state. Legendary and exotic items used to be expensive to earn and upgrade. Yes, it's important to note that back in the day, the perks on weapons had to be purchased, and they were not cheap in the slightest. As an additional note, at this time strange coins were extremely rare, to the point most people would just save them up until something that looked amazing would show up. In today's Destiny, you can clean Xur out every week if he decides to sell an exotic that isn't 3 to 10 years old. Anywho, the moral of the story is that weapons you got in the first year of Destiny felt unique, even if they weren't. They felt personal. I distinctly remember spending 3 hours on my first Nightfall, popping every synth I had to finally get my first legendary. It was a monumentous occasion, and despite it not being very good, I used it for the rest of the game's lifespan. In today's Destiny, you find yourself using things that are good rather than what you have, and while that may make the game better, I believe it makes the experience worse. Nowadays, when you get a legendary whatever from every other activity, you just dismantle it with all of 2 seconds of thought. Whereas back in the day, it was more of a, oh, I got a scout rifle, I don't have one of those. And you proceeded to use it despite Dado telling you that your roll was trash, because that's all you had. Those guns in that first year were yours, and rarely you found people copying your exact loadout because it was just so hard to get weapons in general. This is where I give the fair counter-argument, which is that it was hard to get legendary guns. Almost too hard. And getting a good roll on them? Good fucking luck. Add to that exotics, those things rarely drop to the point that you are better off hoping for strange coins or mass turning in bounties in hopes of getting one of the exotic quests. And I understand that after 10 years of Destiny 7 and its sequel, you have to introduce more weapons, and naturally people want new weapons more. This is where I say I'm stumped. I don't know the solution here. Craftable weapons are, in my opinion, a very good attempt at a solution. You can make a weapon with the perks you want and level it up, and you can track your kills with it. This is probably the closest you can ever get to mixing logic with sentiment. Next up on the docket, power creep. Now this has been a problem for Destiny since Vault of Glass came out. It started with primary weapons that dealt elemental damage. This sounds insignificant today, but back then you have to understand that elemental burns were much more lethal, and given how hard it was to survive, you didn't often find yourself scouring the battlefield for ammo. For your special weapons, at least not if you intended to survive. These weapons made every other primary weapon nearly obsolete in PvE activities. That is, if you could actually get one to drop. Moving quickly past Vault of Glass, we get Crota's End, which released by far the strongest legendary weapon of all time, Black Hammer. A sniper which upon 3 successful critical hits refunded all ammo directly to the magazine. This turned the sniper into a machine gun with unlimited ammo. This was obviously nerfed to the point of being made an exotic, with a worse exotic trait, might I add. And now this is really just ancient history, to set the stage, if you will, for current day Destiny, because that's what matters more here. For current day Destiny, nothing demonstrates the power creep more than everything in the final shape. Prismatic combines every good thing from every other subclass and puts it in one. Let's use the current Crucible cancer, Hunter. Hunter's dodge currently will either reload your guns or your melee, as it always has, but now it also slows enemies around you and leaves a decoy that takes aim assist, deals damage when you get too close to it, and spawns 250 damage green worms that chase you down. This is just the dodge. Look, I understand that this is a final expansion and they wanted to make a cool subclass. I get it. But this shit is not fun to play against. Add to this the fact that you can get an exotic cloak that gives you 2 other exotic perks when using Prismatic, but not any other subclass. Just makes it even more miserable to play against at times. Luckily, the Hunter Exotic Cloak looks hideous, so it's never used. Temporarily putting aside my PvP disdain for Prismatic, I'd like to note that there is very little reason to use a subclass other than Prismatic in PvE. Short of running a very specific build or Well of Radiance, there's little reason to not use Prismatic. That being said, I do not think Prismatic makes a difference between an encounter being difficult or not, given how overpowered we've been for years. But the point isn't difficulty, it's balance. This brings me to my biggest complaint in terms of power creep, Still Hunt. This sniper gives you the power of the sun in the palm of your hand. It gives you a free golden gun that works with Celestial Nighthawk. To put this into perspective, 75% of players who participated in Day 1 of Salvation's Edge were hunters. 75%. This is solely because of this exotic and how laughably easy it makes boss encounters. Look, I won't delve much deeper into this because, firstly, if you play Destiny, then you already know several other examples. Secondly, I am not Dado or anyone else in the top 1% of players, so I don't feel like there's much more I can personally elaborate on here. At last, here we are, the point of utmost contention, my Crucible complaints. Once again, I must provide context here. I am not an amazing player.
Mr. President!
I play on 2 sensitivity for starters, so if someone jumps over me, I just die. I'm definitely an above average player, but that's more due to my game sense than actual ability. With all that out of the way, let's begin. I really hate shotguns. There, I said it. I hate how inconsistent they are. Whenever someone else uses a shotgun, it feels like I'm getting hit by a Barrett 50 cal from who cares how far away. but whenever I try to use a shotgun, it's like I'm shooting a marshmallow gun across a basketball court. To summarize, if you're an enemy, effective. If you are me, get fucked. Secondly, I hate Titans with a fucking passion. Luckily, Prismatic Hunters have replaced Titans as the most toxic class, but don't think I've forgotten how many times I've been one-shotted by a shoulder charge or had my own bullets reflected at me. Adding to this irritation is the fact that Titans only ever have shotguns equipped. It's like it's permanently glued to their hands because I swear they never use any other special weapon, and God forbid they use their primary. Also, quick side note here, to that one Prismatic Titan in Trials who was using the exotic class item that could one-shot melee my entire team from 10 meters away, I hope you step on a 2x4 Lego brick. Heavy ammo. It shouldn't be in comp nor Trials. It's dumb, it's not fun to play around, and if you're facing a Titan, don't even bother trying to contest it. They'll just put up their barrier and sit on it. That's it. I hate heavy. Random teammates. Why does Destiny follow in Apex's footsteps and decide that I need the level 3'd kid who's never played an FPS in his life, and the other team gets the biggest sweat I've ever seen, complete with 3 adept weapons and an inability to miss? Seriously, can the matchmaking just be even? More often than not, my games are just a sweep in one direction or another, and frankly, that's just annoying on both sides of it. I do not like the change from primary, secondary heavy to question mark heavy. I have a couple of reasons for this, but the first one is in regards to the first year of Destiny 2. What did this accomplish? Stasis nor Strand existed, so what was the point of this? It served no goal outside of allowing for someone to run double special, which is almost never done. Also, it eliminates the balance that special weapons had in Crucible. Before, you had to play around the 2 rounds of whatever weapon the enemy had. That was part of it. In D1, you couldn't use all your sniper shots in later rounds in case a self-res went off. This, while admittedly could be annoying, added a lot of depth and skill gap to the game. In today's Destiny, it's not uncommon to see a long-range scout or pulse rifle paired with a sub or sidearm. This takes away a lot of the tug-of-war that I think Destiny 1 thrived on. Furthermore, you cannot switch a special weapon to a primary without losing all of your ability charge. This is just dumb. It makes sense if a round is taking place, but in between rounds? What if I want to use a primary that's in my secondary slot instead? It just feels ill planned out. Lastly, and this is a big one, I do not understand nor appreciate the changes from Destiny 1 till now for Hunters. Namely, the trip mine and throwing knife nerfs. Trip mines now have next to no radius and do maybe 150 damage if you're lucky. They used to be a threat that allowed for strategic play, but now they're just a waste of a grenade and an even bigger waste of an exotic. I also remember when throwing knives could one-shot, and let me tell you why they still should. Because unlike shoulder charge, a throwing knife required skill to use. You had to hit a headshot to one-shot an enemy, and it would only do it with burn. And given all the healing now available in this game, I don't see why it doesn't still have this effect.
New card. What do you think?
Now, this was a relatively short video, mainly so I could give my thoughts on a game that far too often absorbs my time, and more importantly, so I could show my half-baked skills. And this is where I must leave Destiny as a whole with its greatest compliment, which is paradoxically its greatest flaw. This may be one of the greatest co-op experiences of all time. Unfortunately, if you don't have friends, it's just Destiny with a side of some amazing feeling gameplay.